World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history. More than 70 million people died. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. The Holocaust wiped out 6 million Jews. And when it was over, the world was forever changed. But here is the question that has haunted historians for decades. Why did it happen? Was it just one man's madness? Was it the Treaty of Versailles? Or were there deeper forces at work? The truth is far more complex than any single explanation. World War II was not inevitable, but it was the result of decades of mistakes, miscalculations, and choices that, in hindsight, seem almost deliberately designed to lead to catastrophe. In this documentary, we will trace the real causes of World War II, from the peace that ended World War I to the economic collapse that destroyed democracy in Germany, from the rise of Hitler to the failure of appeasement, from Japanese expansionism to Italian aggression. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand why one historian called World War II the continuation of World War I by other means, and why the lessons of this war are more relevant today than ever. To understand why World War II happened, you have to go back to the end of World War I on November 11, 1918. The guns fell silent across Europe. The Great War was over, but the peace that followed would plant the seeds of an even greater conflict. Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, was the peace settlement between the Allied powers and Germany, and it was a disaster from the start. The treaty had three main provisions. First, the War Guilt Clause, Article 231, forced Germany to accept full responsibility for starting the war. This was deeply humiliating for the German people, who felt they had simply defended themselves against aggression. Second, Germany was stripped of territory. It lost about 12% of its pre-war land area, including the rich industrial region of Upper Silesia, the Polish corridor, and all of its overseas colonies. The city of Danzig, with its overwhelmingly German population, was made a free city under League of Nations control. Third, Germany was forced to pay massive reparations, billions of dollars in damages to the victorious powers. The exact amount was set in 1921 at 132 billion gold marks. This was an impossible burden. The German people were outraged. They felt they had been betrayed by their own government, which had agreed to an armistice based on President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. The treaty, they believed, was a dictated peace, not a negotiated settlement. The French, in particular, were determined to punish Germany and ensure it could never threaten France again. But the treaty was neither lenient enough to win German cooperation nor harsh enough to permanently weaken Germany. As historian Roy H. Ginsburg put it, the Treaty of Versailles was neither lenient enough to appease Germany nor harsh enough to prevent it from becoming a dominant continental power again. One of the treaty's most damaging provisions was the demilitarization of the Rhineland, the German territory bordering France. The German army was also reduced to 100,000 men, with no tanks, no aircraft, and no submarines. This was deeply humiliating for a nation that had once boasted the most powerful army in Europe. The German economy, already weakened by war, was devastated. Germany had financed the war by borrowing money, and now it had to print trillions of marks to pay reparations. The result was hyperinflation. By 1923, the mark had become almost worthless. People burned banknotes for warmth. Savings were wiped out overnight. This economic chaos destabilized the Weimar Republic, Germany's fragile democracy. Moderate parties lost support. Extremist parties, both communist and nationalist, gained ground. Stage was set for the rise of the most dangerous demagogue in history. In 1929, the United States stock market crashed. The Great Depression had begun, and it would have catastrophic consequences for the world, especially for Germany. Was hit harder than almost any other country. Its economy depended on American loans, which had fueled its recovery in the 1920s. When the American loans dried up, German industry collapsed. By 1932, German unemployment had reached 6 million, nearly one-third of the workforce. Factories closed. Banks failed. People starved. The middle class, which had once formed the backbone of the country, was wiped out. The German people lost faith in democracy. The Weimar Republic, which had never been truly accepted, was blamed for the disaster. Extremist parties flourished. The Communist Party won increasing support, and the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, saw their membership surge, promised something that no one else could: hope. He promised to restore German pride, to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, to create jobs, and to return Germany to greatness. His message resonated with millions of desperate, angry Germans. But the Great Depression was not just a German phenomenon. It affected the entire world. Countries withdrew from international affairs, focusing on their own domestic crises. This isolationism would have deadly consequences. The United States, which had refused to join the League of Nations, retreated into protectionism. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930 imposed massive tariffs on imported goods. Other countries retaliated. World trade collapsed. The League of Nations, which had been established to prevent future wars, was powerless. It had no army. It could not enforce its resolutions, and its members were reluctant to intervene in international disputes. In this environment of economic despair and international paralysis, dictators flourished. Adolf Hitler was not born a dictator. He was born in Austria in 1889, a failed artist and a bitter man who blamed Jews and Marxists for Germany's defeat in World War I in 1919. He joined the German Workers' Party, which later became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. He quickly became its leader, using his extraordinary oratory skills to whip crowds into a frenzy. In 1923, Hitler attempted a coup d'état in Munich, the Beer Hall Putsch. It failed. Hitler was arrested and imprisoned, but his trial made him a national figure, and in prison he wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf, which outlined his ideology. Ideology was a toxic mix of racial hatred, extreme nationalism, and expansionism. He believed that Germans were a superior Aryan race destined to dominate the world. He believed that Jews, Slavs, and other subhumans were the enemies of the German people. He believed that Germany needed Lebensraum, living space, in the East. By 1932, the Nazi Party was the largest party in the German parliament, but Hitler still faced opposition. President Hindenburg and the conservative elite believed they could control him. They were wrong. On January 30, 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Within months, he had consolidated power. The Reichstag fire gave him an excuse to suspend civil liberties. The Enabling Act gave him dictatorial powers, wasted no time in pursuing his goals. He withdrew Germany from the League of Nations. He began a massive rearmament program in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. He reintroduced conscription in 1935. He started to expand Germany's territory. The Western powers, Britain and France, watched Hitler's rise with growing alarm, but they did nothing. Why? The answer is a policy called appeasement. It was based on the belief that Hitler's demands were reasonable, that he simply wanted to undo the injustices of the Treaty of Versailles. Policy was championed by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. He believed that by giving Hitler what he wanted, war could be avoided. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. In 1936, Hitler ordered the German army to march into the Rhineland, which had been demilitarized by the Treaty of Versailles. The German generals were nervous. They had orders to retreat if the French resisted. The French did nothing. The British protested but took no action. In March 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, the Anschluss. Again, there was no resistance. Chamberlain wrote in his diary, "The Germans have behaved perfectly well." In September 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German population. Chamberlain flew to Munich to meet Hitler. He returned with a piece of paper that he believed guaranteed peace in our time. Hitler's promises meant nothing. In March 1939, German forces invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. The policy of appeasement was in ruins. Chamberlain finally realized that Hitler was not interested in peace. He was interested in conquest, but by then it was too late. While Germany was expanding in Europe, Japan and Italy were pursuing their own imperial ambitions. Japan was a rapidly industrializing nation that lacked natural resources. It depended on imports of oil, iron, and rubber, mostly from Western-controlled colonies. This dependence was seen as a threat to Japanese security. In September 1931, the Japanese army manufactured a pretext to invade Manchuria, a region of northern China rich in natural resources. The invasion was brutal. The League of Nations condemned the action, but Japan simply withdrew from the League in 1937. Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun. The Japanese committed horrific atrocities, including the rape of Nanking, in which an estimated 200,000 civilians were killed. Japan's ambition did not stop at China. It wanted to create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a Japanese-dominated empire in Asia and the Pacific. This brought it into direct conflict with the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands. Italy, meanwhile, was led by Benito Mussolini, who had seized power in 1922. Mussolini dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia, one of the few independent African nations. The League of Nations imposed sanctions, but they were ineffective. Italy also invaded Albania in 1939 and Greece in 1940. Mussolini's ambitions, like Hitler's, were expansionist and aggressive. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, had emerged. They were united by a common ideology: militarism, expansionism, and contempt for democracy. By the summer of 1939, the world was on the brink of war. Hitler had set his sights on Poland. The Polish corridor, which had been created after World War I, separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. Hitler demanded that the corridor be returned. Poland refused. And this time, Britain and France would not stand by. They had finally realized that appeasement had failed. Hitler, however, made a crucial strategic move. He signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union, a treaty of non-aggression. Secretly, the treaty also divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Germany would get Western Poland. The Soviet Union would get Eastern Poland, the Baltic states, and parts of Romania. With the Soviet Union neutralized, Hitler was free to attack Poland. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland from the west. The invasion was swift and brutal. The German army used a new tactic called Blitzkrieg, lightning war, which combined tanks, aircraft, and infantry in a coordinated assault. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The war that began in Europe soon spread across the globe. In April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. May, it invaded France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. France fell in just 6 weeks. In June 1941, Hitler made a catastrophic mistake. He invaded the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. The Soviet Union, despite the non-aggression pact, was now an enemy. The invasion was the largest military operation in history. It would ultimately prove to be Hitler's undoing. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States naval base in Hawaii. The attack was a gamble. Japan hoped to cripple the American fleet and prevent the United States from interfering in its conquest of Southeast Asia. It failed. The attack brought the United States into the war. Within days, Germany declared war on the United States. The war had become truly global, so why did World War II happen? Was it Hitler? Was it the Treaty of Versailles? Was it the Great Depression? The answer is all of the above. The war was the result of a toxic combination of factors. First, the Treaty of Versailles created the conditions for war by humiliating Germany and creating a deep sense of grievance. Second, the Great Depression destroyed democracy in Germany and created the desperate conditions that allowed Hitler to rise to power. Third, the policy of appeasement encouraged Hitler to believe that he could continue his aggression without consequences. Fourth, the expansionist ambitions of Japan and Italy created additional theaters of conflict. The failure of the League of Nations and the isolationism of the United States prevented any effective international response. There is another factor that is often overlooked: ideology. Hitler was not just a nationalist, he was a racial ideologue. He believed in the superiority of the Aryan race and the need to exterminate or enslave subhumans. This ideology made the war a war of extermination, not just conquest. World War II ended with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945 and Japan in August 1945, but the war had changed the world forever. The Holocaust had revealed the depths of human depravity. The atomic bomb had unleashed a new terror, and the Cold War had begun. The lessons of the war are clear. When nations choose revenge over reconciliation, isolation over cooperation, and aggression over diplomacy, the result is catastrophe. The Treaty of Versailles taught us that humiliating a defeated enemy does not bring peace. It plants the seeds of war. Appeasement taught us that standing up to aggression is essential. The Great Depression taught us that economic despair can lead to political extremism. And the Holocaust taught us that racial ideology is a poison that must be resisted at all costs. World War II was not inevitable. It was the result of human choices. And the greatest tragedy is that the same mistakes have been repeated many times since. We must never forget the causes of World War II. Because as the historian George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe.